promote, and Troy, if you guys do too, feel free to speak up. And then we'll get right into our main event today. One of them, is if we can get political for a second, this Saturday is the March for Our Lives. And I know there's one happening in Stockton, downtown. Is there one in Turlock or Modesto? Or both?
Yes.
Wow.
Modesto. Yeah, in the morning and at 10.
At 10 o'clock. And Merced?
It's microscopic.
Oh, don't say that.
Well, Merced is microscopic.
If Turlock can have one, so can Merced. A real one. I encourage you to get out there and support the efforts that are making to help improve safety in schools. We've got in April 1st, which is, I guess, some holiday, April Fool's Day, and just April Fool's.
It's the atheist day.
Yeah. So up in Sacramento, it's the 10th annual Flying Spaghetti Monster potluck and party. There's pirates, there's songs, there's spaghetti.
Beer ball cannons?
What's that?
Beer ball cannons?
If you want to bring them. I don't know what those are, but sure.
Should we bring his Holy Newsman?
Yes. Oh, I haven't seen that since the Reason Rally. Bring it. Bring it. Yeah.
That's what's in Foster Ferry and Hubbard. Stripper factories and beer balls.
I wanted to go to the event up in Sacramento.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not doing one locally, but it's up in Sacramento. If you want to carpool. We've got the standard stuff, the first Friday dinners in Lodi, the third Friday dinners in Stockton. We're doing a highway cleanup in Lodi on April 7, and then on April 14th is the annual Love Lodi event. And so if you want to come up there, we haven't yet picked a project yet. Just trying to wait and see what the needs are. But the good thing about Love Lodi is that it's kid-friendly. So if you have kids, you want to bring them. It's usually some kind of painting or clean up trash or something like that. We've got, towards the end of April, the March for Science, another march, and Earth Day. And so we've already paid to have a table at that. You two are in charge of it.
We've got so many great ideas.
I'm sure you're like, oh yeah, we've got that in less than a month. So we've got that game night a couple times. It was at the 4th Tuesday of each month. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. And then happening at the towards the end of May, I don't know, is anyone else going to the American Humanists Association's annual event in Vegas? Troy is?
Yeah.
My son's graduating in June, so on the same day.
Reschedule.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So that'll be a cool event. Troy, we'll see you there.
I got a double, 2 beds, and we're going to make a fort.
That's awesome. And so tell me about, Troy, any events that your group has in the next couple of months?
I don't know. It's all on the website. We're in, we did get finally, California approved our tax exempt status.
Hey!
So
fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, we didn't know we had to do that.
Yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah.
The IRS, federal, state.
Well, we're okay with the IRS because of the AHA.
Oh, I see.
But
yeah,
the state wanted to know what we're doing and why we're not paying taxes.
Yes.
So
yes.
Now we don't have to.
Right. Just make sure you file your annual report card, your postcard thing. Cool. So we're good. Any questions about upcoming events? Okay. I first met Sean at I think it was Pre-Thought Day. And he had emailed me a couple months before saying, I have this Robert Ingersoll thing that I do. And I'm like, really? That sounds interesting. Tell me more. And he did. And at the time, I was so busy getting all the other stuff set up for Free Thought Day, all I could offer Sean was, well, we can give you a spot on the grass and you can do your thing. And he was eager to do that, and I thought that was awesome. And unfortunately, during the day, I was so busy with everything else, I barely got a chance to come by and say hi. But I heard from many people who were at Pre-Thought Day who were like, there was this guy pretending to be Robert Ingersoll the whole day, and he was awesome. I heard this from multiple people. And so I got in touch with him again and said, yeah, let's bring you down to Manteca, be a part of our colloquium. Since then, he's also performed as Mr. Ingersoll for the Sacramento Humanists. I personally think this is a show that needs to go much larger than the Central Valley. So please, let's welcome Sean O'Brien to the stage, and as Robert Ingersoll.
I believe in the government of kindness. I believe in truth, in investigation, in free thought. I would like to give a little bit more liberty to men, a little more liberty to women. I do not believe that the hand of want will be eternally extended in the world. I do not believe that the prison will forever scar the ground. I do not believe the shadow of the gallows will forever curse the earth. I do not believe that it will always be true that the men and women who work the hardest have the least to eat and the least to wear. I do believe that the day will come when liberty, morality, and justice, like the rings of Saturn, will surround the earth. That the world will be better. And every true man and woman, and every free man and woman will do what they can to hasten the coming of the religion of human advancement. We have already compared the benefits of theology and science. When the theologian governed, the world was full of huts and hovels for the many, palaces and cathedrals for the few. To nearly all the children of man, reading and writing were unknown arts. The poor were clad in rags and skins. They devoured crusts and gnawed bones. The day of science dawned. And the luxuries of a century ago are the necessities of today. Men in the middle ranks of life have more of the conveniences and elegancies than the kings and princes of the theological times. And above, and more than this, is the development of mind. There is more of value in the brain of the average man of today, of the master mechanic, of the chemist, of the naturalist, of the inventor, than there was in the brain of the world 400 years ago. These blessings did not fall from the sky. These benefits did not drop from the outstretched hands of priests. They were not found in cathedrals or behind altars, nor were they searched for with holy candles. They were not discovered with the closed eyes of prayer, nor were they in answer to superstitious supplication. These are the children of freedom. The blessings of reason, observation, and experience. And for them all, man is indebted to man. I understand that for many thousands of years, the great questions of existence have been settled by religion. I understand that during all that time, men have gotten their information from priests. I know that when India was supreme, they worshipped Brahma and Vishnu. And when Rome held in its hand the red sword of war, they worshipped Jove. And now our religion has swept to the top. Any man living in India a few hundred or 1,000 years ago would have said, this is the only true religion. Why? Because here is the only true civilization. And now all those religions, having died, although they were all true religions, we say ours is the only true religion because ours is the greatest commercial nation on the earth. Man has made every religion in this world. And that religion has been good or bad according to whether the men who made it were good or bad. If they were savages and barbarians, they made a god like Jehovah. Every man makes his own god. Show me the god a man worships, and I will tell you what kind of man he is. Every man makes his own god. Every man worships his own god. And we have been civilizing our God for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. He's getting better every day. I know that many people believe that it is only in the Bible where one can find a true and perfect standard of morality. There are many good precepts, wise sayings, good rules and regulations in the Bible. And these are mingled with bad precepts, foolish sayings, absurd rules, and cruel laws. In Exodus, we are given an account of the manner with which Jehovah delivered the Jews from Egyptian bondage. We now know that the Jews were never enslaved by the Egyptians. We know this because there is not in the Hebrew language one word of Egyptian origin, and there cannot be found in the language of the Egyptians one word of Hebrew origin. This being so, we know that the Hebrews and the Egyptians could not have lived together for hundreds of years. Certainly, Exodus was not written to teach morality. In that book, you cannot find one word against human slavery. As a matter of fact, Jehovah was a believer in that institution. The killing of cattle with hail and disease, the murder of every firstborn so that in every home is death, certainly wasn't moral. It was fiendish. All the laws found in Exodus, so far as they were good and sensible, including the Ten Commandments, were at that time in force among all the people of the world. Murder is and always was a crime, and always will be as long as the majority of people object to being murdered. Industry always is and always was an enemy of larceny. The nature of man is such that he admires the truth teller and despises the liar. Among all people, among all tribes, truth telling is considered a virtue and false swearing a vice. The love of parents for their children is natural, and it is a love that is found among all the animals that live. The worship of, quote, any other god, unquote, could not have been worse than the worship of Jehovah. And nothing is more absurd than the sacredness of the Sabbath. Before we can truthfully say that the Bible constitutes a moral guide, we must add and subtract. We must throw some things out and add others in their place. Many of the laws and regulations found in Leviticus, Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are good. Many are absurd and cruel. The entire ceremonial of worship is insane. Most of the punishments for the violation of law are brutal. The fact is that the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, upholds nearly all crimes. And to say that it is moral is as absurd to say that it is merciful or true. There is nothing of moral value found in Joshua or Judges. These books are filled with crimes, with massacres and murders. The story of Ruth is not particularly moral. In 1st and 2nd Samuel, you cannot find one word calculated to develop the brain or conscience. Jehovah murdered 70,000 Jews because David took a census of the people. David, according to the account, was the guilty one, but only the innocent were killed. In 1st and 2nd Kings, there is nothing of ethical value. All the kings who refused the priest were denounced. And all the crowned wretches who assisted the priest were proclaimed to be the favorites of Jehovah. In that book, you cannot find one word in favor of human liberty. There are some good psalms and some that are merciful. Most of these psalms are selfish. Many are a passionate appeal for revenge. The story of Job shocks the heart of every good man. The children of Job are murdered to settle a little wager between God and the devil. Nothing is done for the children who are murdered. Of course, the book of Esther is utterly absurd, and the only redeeming value of the book is that the name of Jehovah is never mentioned. I like the Song of Solomon, because there you find, because that's about love, that's something I can understand. There are now and again a good proverb. Some are flat and some are commonplace. I like the book of Ecclesiastes, because there you find some sense, some poetry, and some philosophy. Take away the interpolations, and it is a good book. Of course, there is nothing in Nehemiah or Ezra to make men better, nothing in Jeremiah or Lamentations calculated to lessen vice, and only a few passages in Isaiah that can be used in a good cause. In some of them, in Ezekiel and Daniel, there is nothing but the ravings of the insane. In some of the minor prophets, there is now and again a good verse, now and again an elevated thought. The trouble is that the spirit of the Old Testament is bad, selfish, and cruel. The most absurd things are commended, and applauded. The stories that are told of Joseph, of Elijah, of Daniel and Gideon, and many others too, are hideous and hellish. On the whole, the Bible cannot be said to be a good moral guide. Jehovah was not a moral God. He had all of the faults and none of the virtues. He generally carried out his threats, but he never faithfully kept a promise. Of course, the writers of the Old Testament were savages, slowly crawling towards the light. We must give them credit for the noble things they said, and we must be charitable enough to excuse their faults and even their crimes. I know that many Christians regard the Old Testament as the foundation and the New Testament as the superstructure. And while they admit that the Old Testament has faults and mistakes, they insist that the New is the flower and perfect fruit. I admit there are many good things in the New Testament. And if we take from that book the dogmas of eternal pain, of infinite revenge, of the atonement, of human sacrifice, the necessity of shedding blood, if we take from that book the doctrines of non-resistance, of loving enemies, the idea that prosperity is a result of wickedness, and that poverty is in preparation for paradise. If we throw all these out and keep the good, creditable aspects, we can make a fairly good moral guide. Narrow, but moral. You would have nothing about human rights, nothing in favor of the family, nothing for education, for reason, investigation, or thought, but still you would have a fairly good moral guide. On the other hand, if you took the foolish passages, the extreme ones, you could make a creed that would satisfy an insane asylum. If you took the cruel passages, the ones that inculcate eternal hatred, you could make a creed that would shock the heart of a hyena. The Bible is not a good moral guide. Any man who follows faithfully all of its tenets will end up his days in an insane asylum or a prison. These religions teach the slave values. They make inanimate things holy and falsehood sacred. They create artificial crimes. To eat meat on Friday, to be happy on a Sunday, to eat on a fast day, to be happy in Lent, to dispute a priest, to ask for evidence, to give your honest opinion on Christ, Mohammed, or Jehovah is far worse than to maliciously slander your neighbor. To question or doubt miracles is far worse than to deny known fact. These things are the foes of morality. They subvert all conceptions of virtue. Happiness is the only good. Everything that secures happiness is good. That is to say, moral. Everything that is bad is immoral. Therefore, everything that is good is moral and everything that is bad is immoral. What then can be said to be a moral guide? The shortest possible answer is one word: intelligence. The doctrine that future happiness depends upon a belief in God is monstrous. It is the infamy of infamies. The notion that faith in Christ is rewarded with an eternity of bliss, while a dependence upon reason merits everlasting pain, is too absurd for refutation. What man who ever thinks can believe that blood can appease God? And yet our entire religious system is based upon that belief. The ancient Jews pacified Jehovah with the blood of animals, and according to the Christian system, the blood of Christ softened God's heart a little and rendered possible the salvation of a fortunate few. It is hard to conceive how the human brain can give assent to such terrible ideas, or how any sane man can read the Bible and still believe in the doctrine of divine inspiration. We have heard talk enough. We have listened to all of the drowsy, empty, vapid sermons that we wish to hear. We have read your Bible and the works of your best minds. We have heard your prayers, your solemn groans, and your reverential amens. All of these amount to less than nothing. We want one fact. We beg at the doors of your churches for just one fact. We pass our hats beneath your pews and beneath your pulpits and implore you for just one fact. We know all about your moldy wonders and your stale miracles. We want this year's fact. We ask for only one. Give us one fact for charity. Your miracles are too ancient. The eyewitnesses have been dead for 2,000 years. It is contended by many that ours is a Christian government, founded upon the Bible, and all who view that book as false or foolish are destroying the foundations of our country. The truth is, our government was not founded upon the rights of gods, but upon the rights of men. Our Constitution was not framed to declare and uphold the deity of Christ, but the sacredness of humanity. We are the first nation ever to be conceived by the people, for the people. We are the only government on earth with which the gods have had nothing to do. And yet, there are those dishonest and cowardly who would solemnly declare that ours is a Christian government based upon the Bible and upon the infamous laws of Jehovah. All laws for the purpose of making men worship God were born of the same spirit that kindled the fires, that burned the heretics, and gently built the dungeons of the Inquisition. All laws defining or punishing any blasphemy, making it a crime to give your honest opinion about Jehovah, or to laugh at the ignorance of the ancient Jews, or to question the Bible, were passed by impudent bigots and should be immediately repealed by honest men. An infinite God should not have to go into partnership with state legislatures. He should certainly not have to enact laws to prevent himself from being laughed at or questioned. Everyone seems to be afraid to give their honest opinion on the subject of God. They imagine some being up yonder who would be filled with wrath at some poor human being who decided to give his best and honest thought. Can you injure God? No. Why? Because he is infinite. You cannot commit a single sin or injury against him. Therefore, you need to have no fear. And yet, the clergy have been telling the people for hundreds of years, there is a crime called blasphemy. There is a personal God. He made the world, he made you, and you ought to get down on your knees and thank him. Thank him. For what? Ought the beggar to thank God, who is starving amidst plenty? Ought the man who toils hard year after year, yet never sees a decent meal, to thank God? Ought the woman who is married to a drunkard? Ought the invalid who is a slave to hereditary disease? Ought the one who is deformed? Ought the millions of poor slaves to thank God? Let us be honest. If we are to credit God with all that is good, we must balance the accounts and debit him with all that is bad. Anyone who attacks the religious opinion of his time must in his turn expect to be attacked. We have not yet outgrown the barbarism that argument must be answered by personal abuse. The religious world has not yet outgrown the argument that you have to answer every argument, not by showing how it is bad, but showing how the man who makes it is bad. It makes no difference if the maker of an arithmetic turned out to be a scoundrel or not. We should still have to believe that 10 times 10 is 100. I expected to be attacked, and I have not been disappointed. All I ask of the religious world is that they simply tell the truth. But that is a good deal more than they will ever do. There was a time when falsehood from the pulpit smoked like a sword. But now it has become nothing more than an interesting amusement. Lying seems to be the last weapon in the arsenal of theology. We are controlled today by men who do not exist. We are controlled today by phenomena that never did exist. We are controlled today by ghosts and dead men. I propose that we should let the past go. I propose that we should bury the dead past and let the dead past bury the dead past. I believe that Americans have the nerve and the courage and the brains to control and govern themselves without any assistance from dust or ghosts. Superstition has done enough harm already. Religion suspects everything that is pleasant, everything that is joyous. And they often have the notion that God feels best when we feel worst. They have stoned to death the joy of nature with the rock of ignorance and fear. Church and state are two vultures that have fed upon the heart of chained Prometheus. I say, give the human race a chance. Let every man and woman think for themselves and express that thought. There is no wrath in the serene heavens. There is no scowl in the blue of the sky. Upon the throne of the universe, tyranny does not sit as king. This is my doctrine. And I will do what I can while I live to increase in the American people that feeling of independence and personhood. I believe in the gospel of this world. I believe in happiness right here. I do not believe in drinking skim milk all my life with the expectation of butter beyond the clouds. I believe, I say, in the gospel of this world. This is a mighty good world. There are many good people in this world. There's lots of happiness in this world. And I say, let us, as much as we can possibly do so, increase it. Our civilization is not Christian. It did not fall from the sky. It is not the result of divine inspiration. It is the child of invention, of discovery, of applied knowledge, that is to say, of science. When the human race becomes great and grand enough to admit that all have equal rights, when thought is untrammeled, when worship means the doing of useful things, and religion means the discharge of obligations towards one's fellow man, then, and only then, will the world be civilized. Thank you. Ask me questions. We have any more work to do. I'm supposed to take about 5 drinks of water to get.
All right. I know that, I've read some Mistakes of Moses, some of his collected essays, and I understand that a lot of the popular atheists took directly from Ingersoll. Like everything Christopher Hitchens ever said came from Ingersoll, including the, what kind of God creates a man sick and commands him to be well.
Right.
Ingersoll quoted a poem from the 1200s or something. Who did he get his material from? Or?
Okay. From what I can tell, from what I have read, he got his information, one, from his father, who was a minister, a preacher. He was kicked out of a lot of pastorships, pastorages, because he was really, really strong abolitionist, or he was an abolitionist, very, very strong abolitionist, and he just couldn't shut up about it. So he moved around a lot between Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, moved the family around a lot. The other, so of course, Ingersoll's, Ingersoll's anti-establishment pose comes from his father to a certain degree, even though his father was a very religious man. It was Presbyterian, I believe. Anyway, the other source is his wife's mother. His wife's mother was a raging atheist. In the days there, it just was not, especially for a woman. What was his wife's name? I know his wife's name. I can't recall right now. I apologize, but his wife's mother was a real free thinker, and she was well known for her free thinking. And somehow or other, she was left alone to be the free thinker that she was in those days for a woman to express those kind of thoughts. But as far as I can tell, that's where the sources come from. And he loved the law. So I think that loving the law as much as he was just as much well known as a courtroom attorney as he was as a lecturer on the circuit. He argued some of the most famous, some pretty dark, some of the most famous court cases during that century. And so because he loved the law so much, although he had some difficulties with the law throughout his life too, because he did argue cases for people who were just as black as anything, you know. But I think it was a combination of his father, his mother-in-law, and the law that made him into the speaker, the things that he believed. Also, he was, the only way that he was attacked by anyone was that he loved to eat. He just loved to eat. I put on some weight. My wife says I have to lose it. But any picture you see of Ingersoll, he was a pretty stout, corpulent gentleman, and he was the first to admit that he loves all the sensuous things about life, including his wife and his beautiful daughters. He was a real family man. So of course the clergy, they almost threw their hands up in desperation, trying to find what I was saying before about attacking the man and not the thought. They would attack the man all the time, but they couldn't attack Ingersoll because he was like the epitome of the family man. And he was he had a lot of money because of his legal profession, and whether he was living in New York or Washington D.C. or Peoria, he would have people in his home all the time. Artists, thinkers from all over the world. He was personal friends with Garfield and McKinley, and he had a great time living. So I think those things all put together. I think that's where he gets his thought. Yeah, no, you had gathered that.
Well, I was going to say also, speak a little bit about what time period we're talking here. What he actually did. What the whole shtick was, the whole lecture circuit, and how actually popular and well paid on it he was.
He made $8,000 at one.
Right, because it's sort of mind blowing to think.
Well, it titillated the people so much, and intellectualism was more in those days than it is today. Isn't that sad? It really is. Intellectualism, whether it was from the pulpit or in the courtroom or whatever, the age of great oratory, which he was one of the best purveyors. He was likened, but he was praised by Mark Twain and Clarence Darrow and all these other people that he toured with. He toured with them. I think that the intellectualism of the day, and the oratory was very, very grand, and it invoked the pagan spirits and gods and all this other stuff, and it was very, very grand and grandiose. And I think that's one way that he got his I think it's one reason why so many people were into Ingersoll. Most of them were into, either they were titillated by what he was saying because they had been brought up with, God and Christ and all this other stuff banged into their heads. But this new thought, they flocked to his lectures. It's insane. It really was. Yeah.
How did you become to be Ingersoll?
I'm an actor. I love to perform. I renounced any Christian belief. I started off as a disbeliever when I was a kid. I was raised Irish Catholic, and
And that'll do it, right?
That'll do it. And but I was never a believer when I was a kid. You know, I mean, when I was 10 or 13 or something like that, my mother would say, "Oh, he's going to come back someday." You know, that was her wish, the wish of her life. But you know, yeah, I just, and then I taught Catholic schools for 30 years. So I tell people, Ingersoll, my performing of Ingersoll is penance and revenge and atheism. But it's performing too. I just love to perform. We talked about my Poe show. I'm developing a Shakespeare show. I love Shakespeare. That's another thing that I love about Ingersoll, is that he loves Shakespeare. And, you know, so I want to develop a Shakespeare show so I can get it more out there, you know, because the schools have it, but not enough. People just don't hear it enough, you know.
Quick question, then maybe a longer one. We were so silent during your entire presentation.
Yeah.
And you know,
was that a good thing?
Well, that's the question. Is you know, I've been to like rallies in modern era where the audience, if so moved, is you know, cheer or hear or whatever. And so the quick question is, what would the audience have done in Ingersoll's time?
The audiences, I can only imagine. But at the same time, I think that they would have been riveted because they were so used to hearing exactly the opposite. And you know, for the first time, somebody was reaching out to their intellect instead of their fear or their demagoguery, whatever it is. I have that sense. Audiences in those days, of course, were a lot more rowdy than audiences are today. Mark Twain talks about the audiences that he had, but of course he was strictly comedic. But I think Mark Twain, you know, Mark Twain worked with the pause an awful lot. He would pause, and once he actually did it with an audience where he just would pause, and he just stood there, smoking a cigar, and the audience just sat there, and he made them wait, because he wanted to find out how far he could pause going, and he kept it going. It was like a minute and a half to almost 2 minutes long, and then after a little while, some people were tittering back and forth in the audience, you know, and then he never said a word, but they just broke out in this wondrous applause and laughter at him for saying absolutely nothing. And I think that people were, you know, they so needed entertainment. You know, it was books, that was it, in that age, of course. You know, that's why people were so much more intellectual, because they read books.
And so the second part of that is, you know, I've heard that he was an orator and that he gave all these lectures or whatever. My question is, where would someone have gone to see him? Are we talking about universities at the time?
Oh, any of the major cities, Elysium, circus.
City Hall?
Yeah, he would. There were actual circuits which Mark Twain spoke on. You've heard of the Lyceum circuits? They're actually specific venues across the country, and some of them still exist. But if you were a Lyceum speaker, you would have the particular venues and the particular theaters in this particular city around the country, and you would go there and bop from one to the other. And they would already know that you're coming a year ahead because they were connected. The Lyceum was one. Modern day, I forget. There's more than that, of course. But it's like Broadway tour shows these days. They know exactly where they're going from one year to the next, or 5 years ahead. It was organized in that way in those days. You know, Mark Twain or a lot of the other. I think Lincoln actually toured. This is like the Lyceum circuit at some point or another. But yeah, they did know where they were going, and they knew pretty much who they would attract. And he attracted a lot of people. Yeah.
So is this a personal compilation of what he would have said, or is this like an actual...
No, these are actual word for word from his various speeches. I've extracted them. He's got 44 speeches, and yeah, more than you've read some. He's got 44 that I found. He would come up and he would just give a speech for 3 hours, not consulting notes, just off the top of his head. This guy had a towering intellect. He really did. He would have been President of the United States if he had not been an atheist. They asked him to run for governor. He was the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois. I think it was Lieutenant Governor of Illinois. And they asked him to run for Governor of Illinois. And they said, if you run for governor, you have to shut up about all this stuff. He said, no, I can't do that. So he did not run for governor. If he had run for governor, he would have won. Well, you know, the atheism thing. That's a problem. Yes, sir.
One of the things that he really did is he redeemed Tom Paine, brought him back, because Tom Paine was on his way out. No one wanted to talk about Tom Paine. And the thing is that it's happening with Ingersoll, too, because we don't have institutions to carry forward our heroes. And that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is make institutions where we can actually carry on the message of our heroes.
Right. Tom Paine is the most honest human being who ever lived.
He was a filthy little atheist.
Oh, and he was, I mean, if it hadn't been for common sense, our republic would never have been founded, because he funded the Revolutionary War with common sense. And he died with 6 people at his funeral. One woman was trying to steal the stuff from his carriage. Just horrible. The most honest man. When he was in France, he went to France and he worked with the revolution, and they threw him in the Bastille because he didn't want to have Louis killed. And then Benjamin Franklin got him out of the Bastille.
Well, yeah, Washington wouldn't and Jefferson wouldn't.
Right. But I mean, Benjamin Franklin was the internationalist.
Yeah.
So, he had lots of sway in France. He's the only person that you'd want to get you out of the Bastille. But he was Thomas Paine. I would love to do a show about Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
I have even more respect of him than I do Ingersoll, and that's huge, because he was just so maligned and so honest his whole life. But yes.
Well, you were just saying how he had so many people showing up, he was making thousands of dollars back then at his shows. So why, obviously they knew he was atheist, so why would that have been a major issue if he was to run for office? He obviously had a lot of respect.
Well, to go to a lecture is different from actually voting for an atheist into office. It never would have happened, even in those days of greater intellectualism. I don't think that they would have ever voted an atheist into office. I don't think it could have happened.
Bernie is now.
Pardon me?
Bernie is an
Well, yeah, but not the presidency, and he's from Vermont.
Even Bernie would not admit to anything.
He spoke at the First Reason rally.
Yeah, it would have been tough.
There, so.
It would have been tough for an actual atheist to get into the presidency. It was no problem at all for him to be friends with Garfield and McKinley. He lived down the street from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but that would have been tough to call. Well, evidently he thought it would have been impossible, because he loved notoriety. He loved notoriety. He loved everything about life, and one of them was his fame. He enjoyed his fame. One thing that his fame brought him was all these people, all these noted thinkers and artists and politicians and statesmen would come to New York or Washington, and they would go to his house to be amongst the Ingersoll family, because it was such a wonderful, warm place to be. And because he had his law practice and his lecturing, he was able to bring out some of the best luxuries for people to enjoy while he was there. And the talk, between him and his wife and his stepmother, must have been like absolutely wonderful. Just talking about things.
Besides just his thoughts on religion, I know that he was for women's rights.
Yes.
I believe of being pro-choice.
Yes.
Maybe you can speak to that some or quote.
As far as women's rights, I couldn't say much about pro-choice. I don't know. I know that he
supported contraception.
He supported contraception. Okay. Yes, of course. That he definitely did. I couldn't talk very intelligently more about that. I just know that he did support contraception. It was probably through his stepmother that he got all these ideas. She was very, very much one of the first feminists, and he saw, because his life was surrounded with women, his stepmother, his wife, and his 2 daughters, he saw women as as just
special,
every single bit as good as anything else on earth, and it was his life. The women around him was his life, and but as far more intellectually, I have to read more into specifically some more of his speeches or what have you. Answer that one. But any other questions? Thank you. You've been wonderful. I really appreciate you coming out, especially on a day like this. That's what I like. my friend and roadie, Alan Ogilvy. Of course, have a really wonderful evening. I'd love to talk to anybody if you have a chance. We're just going to be tearing this down.